Wow, hard act to follow, hard act to proceed. Where's Kat? Somewhere out there. But I feel lucky and privileged to be sandwiched between these two wonderful performers. And thank you for inviting me back. Yeah, it was 2011. I wasn't sure of the year, but we figured that out today. So 7 years later, it's a nice cyclical number. I got to read with the wonderful beat poet John Giorno. I'm sure a lot of you remember his performance that night too. I think I had to follow him as well. No, maybe I had to precede him, which is... Anyway, I'm going to start... check. I'm going to start with a couple of new poems, poems still in process. Including this one called Fake News. Now, originally it was called An American Bodyguard Foresees His Death. I was thinking, of course, of the great W.B. Yeats poem, An Irish Airman Foresees His Death, while reflecting on the probability that there must be some people in the current president's security retinue who are less than enthusiastic at the thought of having to sacrifice their lives in the event of an attack on the presidential personage. So I started thinking about that. I decided to write a poem from the point of view of one of these people. So it was called An American Bodyguard Foresees His Death. That's now the italicized subtitle, and it's actually called Fake News. Do I love my country less than I pledged, since I haven't yet brought the tent top down on this circus? Head clown, I and the others code call him in small font, or else impotus, though so far he seems all too robust. True, top story status beats any blood tonic or drug. The powerful never kick the bucket without a shove. But if some fanatic does attempt to off him, snipe him, stab him, body bomb him, my Navy SEAL-trained nerves will trigger a textbook expert tackle, not of the perp, you understand, but the Oval Officer himself. I'll cloak him like a flak vest of flesh, pin him down behind the podium, block bullets with my skull, spine, sacrum, who knows, while gamely the band finishes Hail to the Chief, and streamers go on showering the crowd, their cheers sharpened to screams, while I bleed out, locked in his trembling arms. In 2015, kind of on the spur of the moment, I went to Lesvos during the, at the peak of the refugee, Syrian and Afghan and Yemeni and Palestinian and Iraqi and other refugee influx. They're coming through Lesvos, as you probably remember, going on to mainland Greece and then trying to get into Europe. The borders were starting to close just at that moment. And I was there for about a month, and I'm trying to write about it now, struggling to write a nonfiction account. I'm not used to nonfiction. I like writing poems and stories where I don't know how things are going to end. So I write towards an unknown conclusion with the excitement that I hope the reader feels reading towards that conclusion. It's a sort of suspense. In this case, of course, in every scene, I know how it ended. I know how the event ended, what happened when the raft reached the beach, or what happened in the transit camp during a riot, things like that. So there's inherently less suspense for me, so I have to find other ways to get interested in the material, and besides wanting to actually publish the book and tell people what it was like and what's going on there, continuing to go on there. But I have found ways. In the meantime, I wrote this one poem. It's not about an experience I had. Another volunteer who had been on another island, Samos, told me a story, and I wrote the story from her point of view, telling this story. So Christmas work detail, Samos, and it begins with 3 words in Arabic, and I'm sure I'm definitely mispronouncing them. Looks on the page like Eid Milad Majid, Arabic for happy birth feast or Merry Christmas. In the olive grove on the high ground facing west into rain, We dig graves for 3 men drowned in the straits. Syrians, maybe, dispossessed of everything by the sea, so there's no knowing for sure. This much you can say for any grave, it's landlocked. And these men will lie a decent distance uphill, out of sight of the beach, where on Sunday their bodies washed ashore in plausible orange life vests, €10 each, packed with sawdust, bubble wrap, rags. These rains haven't softened the soil, yet digging up here feels only right. The waves that buried them terrified them first, and we guess, again, that they, like the ones the crossing didn't kill, were from desert towns, this sea inconceivable as the Arctic. And each cardboard casket, awaiting its patient passenger, looks almost seaworthy after the cut-rate rafts they fled in, and which, deflated, washed in after them, silent, as if shyly contrite. It seems we've failed them, despite the safe graves. In a grove this untended, the ground is brined bitter with black fruit rotting, and on islands, nowhere is far enough from the waves. In our workshop today, starting at 9, I didn't think you'd catch the note there. I'd fought for 9:30. They wouldn't even give me 9:30. Anyway, I'm just kidding. It was great. I really enjoyed it. What I'd actually... It was what I did was I gave members of the group poems in languages, in foreign languages, and asked them to make a translation based on the sound of foreign words, the meaning of which they didn't understand. The idea is to free the poet from the self-mind, the ego mind, the I mind, the day mind, the mind that wants to say something specific in certain words in a certain typical way, instead of just going with the music of the words and just letting the words carry them somewhere. And the results are always really wonderful, I think, and they were especially this morning. And I think you're going to get to hear at least one example a little later on from one of the poets. Anyway, one of the poets we worked with was Paul Celan, a very short, beautiful German poem by Paul Celan. This is a poem of my own called Inspired by a Line by Paul Celan, so I don't have to explain how it came about. I'll just read it. Each day I wake feeling I've already failed. Tonight let's get wrecked and call it Venice. A woman I loved lied that she was healed, and for a night until waking we were. I was born with a mortgage, now show me the house, the home, slip me the dose that'll make me care less. I wake each day feeling I've already torn what I meant to rethread. Did anything seem in Eden, or was it all its own is? There was that woman so enlisted in life, one of passion's true recruits. Love, I said, I am so bad at loving, and the usual biz ensued. Scenes, loss, and its isotopic slow fade, never done. On the deathbed of the skeptic where he slept each night of his dying life, he said, it was hard having so little skin to skin with the world, but look on my works. Venice is sinking, and it might be the case it was never the key at all. Said a small voice in the cirrus of a dream, love is its own abode. Not sure what it meant, though I think I knew once. There is some cold road that you must renounce. Just to stick with that theme of languages and immersing yourself in sounds that you might not understand on a rational level, but just sounds that appeal to you and make you think of certain ideas or images. Here's a passage from my most recent novel, and okay, this is a poetry event, this is a very lyric passage, and it's talking about language. So I think it's legitimate. It's also very short. It's a little section. I have a series of little sections in this novel, which is otherwise story-driven. It's kind of a plot-driven novel, even a kind of adventure story in places. But I have little passages I call canticles scattered here and there in the novel that are just sort of lyrical ruminations on ideas that have come up in the novel. And this is one of them. From a section called Seeking Lethe, L-E-T-H-E, the river of forgetting and death. Every language has a word that expresses its meaning better or more beautifully than the equivalent word in any other tongue. Sometimes the beauty is conceptual, as in the case of the German Lebenslüge, or life lie, the convenient, if sometimes fatal fiction around which you build a life or a nation shapes its identity. Sometimes the beauty is acoustical. Listen to the Greek for winter, chimonas. What other word so encloses the cold season in its very sounds? That long middle vowel echoes the moaning of north winds and evokes the O of Boreas's blue-lipped, puffing mouth in those drawings in the upper corners of classical maps. And the guttural CH of the word's opening, chimonas, a harsh, raw, throat-clearing sound, the rasp of winter illness, colds, and coughs. Then the dwindling hiss of the last syllable, snow blowing over a sheet of ice. Or take the Turkish for friend, arkadaş. You could say a beautiful sounding word for a beautiful concept and leave it at that, but there's more. Friend, or even ami or philos, seems too brief, clipped, and uncomplicated to house all the qualities of a true friend. Arkadaş is a roomier word, an atrium of rich sounds, the last syllable lingering in a shh that extends the life of the utterance, delaying the silence to follow. A secretive sound, too. Hush, say nothing to the world about this friendship. It's ours alone. And in the opening arc, you might hear arc, the span and scope of a lifelong connection. But mainly you hear how the word prolongs itself in the same way that death, never a great respecter of borders, can extend beyond death. As you will have gathered, I'm in love with language. I suppose every poet is, more or less. And that's a great help when I write poetry. It's a hindrance when I write novels because there are 100,000 words in a novel. And trying to work with attention, at the level of the syllable, as you can and must in a poem, is just agony and slow death in the case of a novel. So, in fact, I hope not to write another and to write short stories and poetry from now on, because this one almost killed me. So I'm going to follow that one with a poem that kind of falls. I try to pull the readings together based on things that happen in the day and things I hear in the readings that precede me, and I know about some of the stuff Kat's going to do as well, so that helps. So I'm going to follow that one with a poem called Mikalios. Now this is one of the poems I gave to the group today. I gave it to them in Greek. It sounds like to Mikalio ton pyrene stratioti kamrotak se kinise kiorea metomari ke metopanayoti. Those are the first three lines in Greek. And that was the stuff they worked with, creating a sound translation based on the sounds of the Greek words. And I'm not sure if the example we're going to hear later is from this one. It's from Polish. Yeah, it's from Polish. Okay. So that was from Wisława Szymborska poem. So anyway, here's my translation of the poem that I published in my last book. Translation's now a really central part of my whole, process, so to speak, as a poet. I try to do it all the time. Every time I work on a translation of a poem I love, it's like an apprenticeship with a great poet. And I get to know the poem almost as well as the poet must have known it, reading it over and over and over again, getting right inside it to try to create a translation. And this is one that kind of ties to what I just read. And to some of Tanya's references to the soldier, we were ordered to do it, he said. We were ordered to do it. This was published in 1926. It concerns a Greek soldier who has what was then called shell shock, what we would now refer to as PTSD. Mikalios. Mikalios, they said, you're now a soldier. Strutting, delighted, he set out with Vasilis and Maris, but he couldn't march or shoulder arms or manage the simplest thing. Master Corporal, he was always murmuring, please let me go back to my village. A year later in hospital, he would stare mutely through the window at the skies, affixing a meek and nostalgic gaze at some point beyond the horizon, as if to find there someone to implore, please, sir, just let me go home. But Mikalios died a soldier still. His pallbearers were a handful of pals, Maris, Vasilis, a few nameless others. Above him, they shoveled in the dirt, the one bare foot they left sticking out. Poor boy, he was always a bit tall. This poem's called After the CAT Scan, and it connects, I think, to several things that have happened. I almost didn't make it to the festival because of an injury in a hockey game a few days ago. I got hit with a shot. To make a long story short, my knee swelled up and it looked like I wouldn't be able to drive. I could hardly walk. Anyway, it quickly subsided and I was able to come, thankfully, because I really wanted to. But here's the thing, but 7 years ago, 2011, not long before that, or actually, some months before, a few months before that festival, I got a bad injury in a hockey game. Worse injury, I got my larynx shattered, or my voice box crushed in a game, and I couldn't speak at all. So in the hospital, I had to write notes on a pad for the doctor explaining what had happened. And he said, Mister, if you want to speak again or sing again, you're going to have to keep writing notes on a pad and not try to speak for at least 2 weeks. Or absent yourself, go somewhere far away where you're not going to be tempted to try to talk. So I decided on the latter. We'd recently built a kind of shack, I wouldn't even call it a cabin, like a tree house, on a small lake north of Kingston. And I wanted to go up there with my beloved dog and running companion, Isla. Then I realized I can't because I won't be able, she's not on a leash up there. I'll never be able to call her back if she gets in trouble with a porcupine or whatever she always was. So I had to go alone. But reflecting on that after, I wrote a poem just thinking about the dog. And while I was up there, I was reading some classical Greek stuff and thinking about the river of Lethe, the river of forgetting and death. The last thing I'll say before I read the poem is I recently discovered a toast that I put right into this novel, The Nightingale Won't Let You Sleep. It's now my favorite toast of all time, and it involves the ferryman who takes you across the river to Lethe. So it's a Greek toast, Napethanio charos. Charos is Charon. Napethanio charos means death to the ferryman, or may death drop dead. So it's a great. So next time you're drinking with someone, may death drop dead, death to death. And this is a poem that involves Charon, or Charos. After the CAT scan. Larynx shattered in a crash, and the doctor orders you to gag it. Pen and pad, pal, write what you need to say. So you bronchiate goodbye to your wife and daughter and pack for the cabin at Desert Lake. Mutes retreat now, where you'll nod from the dock at dawn-drunk anglers, bass, trout, and walleye, who deem your pantomime thoughtful, fish-friendly. Bit lonely in lack of the dog who so loves to boat in beside you, lunge onto the dock as you ship oars, then disappear for hours. But without your clamor to collar her back. 3 a.m., outside, naked, you re-inflame your throat, chiding woodchucks chewing the frame, your yells like whispers of a Scorsese thug. A long lag before they deign to scatter. It's like you're an ancient, dreaming you're defunct, striving to haul her home across the river that lets no sound slip back, not to wife, daughter, even the dog with her large array ears, who's loyally listening shores apart, will be listening for your tone of praise until the hour her last faculties fade, and she hears only, faintly, the boatman's oars stroking toward her like a muted heart. The other reason I wanted to read that was because 10 Kat said she was going to bring her dog Elsa, and I was really looking forward to that, to the Airbnb, but in the end didn't. So to evoke a dog as best I could. Oh, so leading from that toast, Napathanio Charos, here's a sort of toasting poem. It's called The Vintner's Last Taste. It's for those who try to craft a decent wine in a desperate climate. I understand you now have some wineries around here, right? And even in Owen Sound, which I thought was too far north. They started planting grapevines around Kingston and Prince Edward County about 20 or 30 years ago. No, maybe more, 40 or 50. Now finally they're producing some good wines, but I knew one guy who had been doing it for a long time and was a little bitter because of the struggle, though in a sort of, that one of those affably curmudgeonly people. Anyway, I ended up writing this poem reflecting on his, after his death, reflecting on his vision of what it was to grow grapes in this desperate climate. The Vintner's Last Taste. I gave my life to the vine, signed on long before you other fools swarmed north with your schoolboy skills to these frost-bitten acres. Growing, bottling, blending, tasting, and just plain drinking. All right, fine, I drank too much, but God help the man who outlives his vices. Now the past year of my wasting cancer winds down to this last carafe shared with my wife. Now this last ounce, last taste of wine. Maybe the pears and cut grass of a young Pinot Gris. In truth, I taste just echoes now, but even so, I drain my glass. And I think I will finish with the title poem of the book. The book's called The Waking Comes Late, and of course, so is the title poem. He said needlessly. So The Waking Comes Late. Year by year, the lindens he planted with his mother tap deeper into the hills, root higher into the winds, the slender limbs at midwinter stripped, the skies Frisian blue. And on the lee slope, a few hundred spruce, once seedlings, now fill in a solid, sun-annulling acre, though they turn out to be balsam fir, not spruce. Her mistake and his, or maybe his alone. In those days, he assumed all evergreens were pines or spruce, whatever. Beyond his ego's stunted reach, it was all whatever, all lazy approximation. Now he believes little matters more than knowing right names. But the waking comes late. In the early evening of a life with dusk redoubling in a still hectare of hemlock, tamarack, red-coned cedar, you might stir out of self-induced coma and stare years down into the mind. Too late, you might fear. This insight, like others before it, might fade, the crucial life change fail to hold. Out of the spruce swale, he climbs a knoll into a third and final stand they sowed a few weeks before she died, during a brief and happy remission, she looking years younger, quietly pleased how the steroids had puffed her face enough to fill in wrinkles, pad out the bones. In ambering October light, they dug nursling birches into the knoll's bare scalp. So now, with every spring, it too seems softened, freshened, aging in reverse, while under the earth, the roots of each, in fierce secrecy, radiate like veins, fusing further down into riches, where all the mothers, unfinished, unfolding, remain. Thank you.